Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, this one should be interesting.
It really should. Today we're going to be checking out this interview with Dr. Julie Smith.
Okay.
You heard of her?
Yeah. She's that therapist who's like huge on TikTok, right?
Yes, exactly. She's a clinical psychologist, but she's kind of blown up on TikTok, which is interesting because she gives really relatable advice on like overthinking and anxiety and just like the pressure to be extraordinary, like in this crazy, always on world that we live in.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally get that. I mean, who hasn't felt that pressure lately? It's like everywhere you turn.
Totally. And that's kind of what drew me to this interview. I was like, okay, I got to hear what she has to say. And she was interviewed on the Diary of a CEO podcast.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good one. And we're going to kind of like unpack the key takeaways, right? Because there's a lot there. But essentially, it's like she's found this very unique way to kind of make therapy and like self-improvement accessible,
right?
But also, I don't know, maybe even entertaining.
And not intimidating, you know what I mean? Because sometimes therapy can feel like, ugh, I've got to like unpack my whole life.
Right, exactly. But her approach, it's very practical. And that's what we're all about here, right?
Absolutely. It's like, okay, I can actually do something with this information.
Yes, exactly. And one of the first things that really jumped out at me, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, was this whole idea of the trap of extraordinary.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I don't think I caught that part. What's that about?
So basically, both Dr. Smith and the interviewer, who, by the way, he's also like super successful in his own right, they were talking about how the more they achieve, right, like the more successful they become, the more pressure and noise they face in their lives.
Right.
And it's almost like this constant pull away from the things that they actually value the most, you know, like family and friends. Just finding those moments of peace and quiet.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
It's like that classic saying, be careful what you wish for. You know, we strive for success, but then it comes with all this baggage.
Totally. And it makes you wonder, like, is it selfish to crave a quieter life when you have this platform, this ability to potentially help others?
It's a tough one, right? Because you want to make a difference, but you also have to take care of yourself. And that's where I think Dr. Smith's advice is so valuable.
So right.
She talks about these values check-ins. Have you heard of these?
I have, yeah. I think that's actually a really key takeaway for me from this whole interview.
Me too. Okay, so for those who haven't heard of this, it's not about like setting these big, hairy, audacious goals.
Right. It's not about like, I need to change my whole life.
Exactly. It's more about taking a step back and just reflecting on how you actually want to show up in different areas of your life. Like what's important to you right here, right now.
Yeah, I think that's what I like about it. It's very grounding in a way.
Totally.
And she gives these great examples. Like she wants to be the kind of parent who can just chill at the beach with her kids and hit trees with sticks.
It's the simple things, right?
Exactly. It's about those simple joys, remembering that we're human, not superhuman, which I think we all need to be reminded of sometimes.
For sure. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be this big, overwhelming thing.
Right. It's not about like, I'm going to revamp my entire life starting Monday.
Exactly. That's the beauty of these values check-ins. You can literally just take a few minutes, maybe at the start of each week, or even just when you feel a little lost.
Yeah.
Just jot down your priorities. Like, what matters most to you right now? How do you want to spend your time and energy?
Yeah, and I think that can change too, right? Like what we valued a year ago might be different from what we value today. And that's okay.
Absolutely. Our values can shift and evolve as we grow, and that's totally normal.
Exactly.
It's about having this ongoing dialogue with ourselves, constantly checking in and reevaluating as life unfolds.
I love that. It's about staying connected to what truly matters.
Exactly. And you know what? I think that ties into another big topic that she talks about, imposter syndrome. Because so much of it comes back to feeling like we're not enough, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And she admits to struggling with it herself. Like, here she is, this incredibly successful psychologist, but she still has those moments of self-doubt.
Which is kind of reassuring in a weird way. You know, like, if she feels that way sometimes, maybe it's okay that the rest of us do too.
Absolutely. It makes it feel so much more normal and relatable. And it's so easy to fall into that trap, especially in today's world, where we're constantly bombarded with images of perfection on social media. You know, everyone else seems to have it all figured out.
Oh, tell me about it. And we see that with relationships too, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, exactly. But going back to this imposter syndrome thing, it's like, even when we receive tons of positive feedback, we tend to zero in on that one negative comment.
Oh, always. Like you could have 100 glowing reviews, but that one slightly critical one will just eat away at you.
Totally. It's like our brains are wired to focus on the negative.
It's true. And actually, Dr. Smith explains that this negativity bias, it actually stems from our evolutionary history. Like way back in the day, thousands of years ago, rejection from your tribe could literally mean life or death.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So we developed this hypersensitivity to criticism, this almost irrational fear of disapproval, because it was essential for survival.
So it's like a deeply ingrained instinct. It's not just us being overly sensitive.
Exactly. It's like literally wired into our DNA.
Wow. So given that, how do we deal with that? Like, it's not just a matter of toughening up or ignoring those negative voices, is it?
Unfortunately not. It's not that simple.
Figures.
Right. It'd be nice, but Dr. Smith, she emphasizes that it's more about approaching those negative thoughts, those criticisms with a sense of curiosity, you know?
Curiosity.
Yeah, like instead of immediately judging ourselves or like letting those thoughts send us into a spiral, we can try to observe them with a little bit more distance.
Okay, so not like, oh my gosh, I'm such a failure, everyone hates me.
Right, exactly. More like, that's interesting that I'm having that thought right now. What's going on there?
I see. So we're acknowledging the thought, but we're not letting it, like, take over.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our thoughts are not always facts.
Right. Just because we think something doesn't mean it's true.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here, I think, is that we have a choice. We can choose how much weight we give to those negative thoughts, both our own and those of others.
That's really empowering when you think about it. We have more control than we realize.
We do. Okay, so speaking of control, you know, there's this pressure out there to make these like huge changes when we want to improve ourselves.
Right, like New Year's resolutions.
Oh, totally. It's like this year I'm going to be a completely new person.
Right, new year, new me, all that.
Exactly. But Dr. Smith, she advocates for a different approach, one that's a lot more, I think, sustainable in the long run.
Which is?
Small habits.
Small habits.
Yeah, she's a huge proponent of the power of small habits and consistent effort.
Okay, so like, what kind of habits are we talking about here?
So it could be anything, really. It's just those little things that you do day in and day out that eventually add up to make a big difference.
Okay, so it's not about like waking up one day and deciding to completely overhaul your life.
No, not at all. In fact, she's actually very open about that in the interview. Like, she's not claiming to have it all figured out.
Really? That's refreshing to hear.
I know, right? And she talks about like juggling motherhood and her clinical work. And then on top of that, this whole online platform that she's built.
And she's still figuring things out as she goes.
Exactly. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. And sometimes that progress comes from unexpected places.
Okay, like what?
Well, this is where I think Dr. Smith's emphasis on breathwork comes in. You mentioned that resonated with you.
Okay, so I have to admit, when I first heard her talking about breathwork, I was a little skeptical.
Really? How come?
Well, I mean, it just seemed kind of, I don't know, too simple.
Too good to be true.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how much can changing the way you breathe really impact your mental state?
Yeah.
But then I actually tried it, and I was shocked by how much tension I was holding in my body. Like, I didn't even realize it.
Isn't that wild? It's amazing how something so simple and accessible can be so powerful.
It really is. But why is that? Like, what's the science behind it?
Well, remember when we were talking about the fight or flight response earlier?
Yeah.
So basically, our bodies are constantly reacting to stress even when we don't realize it. And in today's world, that stress is often low level, but it's ever present.
Right. It's like we're always on edge, even if we don't know it.
Exactly. And breath work, it helps regulate that stress response. It brings our bodies back into a state of balance, you know?
Oh, okay. That makes sense. So it's like hitting the reset button on our nervous system.
Exactly. And Dr. Smith, she even teaches this very simple technique called box breathing. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
You can literally do it anytime, anywhere, just a few rounds of this controlled breathing, and it can make a world of difference.
Okay, wow. So we've talked about values, imposter syndrome, the power of small habits, and even the surprising impact of our breath. There's a lot to unpack here.
There really is. And you know what? We haven't even gotten to relationships yet. That's a whole other can of worms.
I know, right? It can be both wonderful and, let's be honest, a bit tricky sometimes. And I feel like social media definitely doesn't help.
Oh my gosh, no. It gives us such an unrealistic view of what relationships are supposed to look like.
Right. It's all romantic getaways and like constant bliss.
Yeah, and everyone's always posting about how much they love their partner and how perfect their life is.
But it's like, come on, people. Real relationships require work and communication.
Absolutely. And sometimes a little bit of space.
Yeah, and sometimes what makes us comfortable in a relationship might seem, I don't know, unconventional to others.
Oh, totally.
Like, okay, this is going to sound weird, but for my partner and me, when we travel, we actually prefer separate hotel rooms.
Really?
I know, it sounds crazy.
No, I get it.
But it's not that we don't enjoy spending time together.
Yeah.
It's just that we've realized that having that little bit of space actually makes us feel more relaxed and more connected in the long run.
That's so interesting. And, it just goes to show that there's no one size fits all when it comes to relationships.
Exactly.
And Dr. Smith talks about this. It's like we get so caught up in these relationship myths that we forget to actually figure out what works for us.
Right, like what actually makes us happy.
Exactly.
And she really emphasizes like honesty and self-awareness as being so key to building those healthy relationships.
Yeah, it's about being honest with ourselves first.
Yes.
About what we need and want, and then being able to communicate that to our partners.
Right, which can be hard.
It can be really hard, especially when we're so used to, trying to please others or live up to these expectations that we've internalized.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of comparison, especially with social media.
Ugh, don't even get me started on social media.
Right. It's like this highlight reel of everyone else's seemingly perfect lives and relationships.
And it's so easy to forget that most of it's not even real.
Exactly. It's curated, it's filtered, it's not the full picture.
Exactly.
So I guess it all comes back to what we were saying earlier about like defining our own version of happy.
100%.
And then having the courage to actually go after that.
Right.
Even if it looks different from what everyone else is doing.
And that actually reminds me, there's this really thought-provoking question that Dr. Smith asks towards the end of the interview.
Oh, yeah. What of it?
She asks, if you didn't have to do anything, what would you do differently?
Wow. Okay, that's a really good one.
Right.
It makes you think.
It really does. It makes you question, like, what parts of our lives are we doing out of obligation versus, genuine passion or joy?
Yeah, like what are we doing just because we feel like we should be doing them?
Exactly. Or because, that's what society expects of us or what we think will make other people happy.
Right. Instead of actually asking ourselves, like, what truly lights us up?
I think that's what this whole conversation boils down to, isn't it?
It really is. Like finding those areas where we might be out of alignment with our values, the things we're doing out of habit or, like you said, societal pressure, rather than like true desire.
Yeah.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
I know, right?
We've covered so much ground. From the importance of values check-ins and understanding, like our evolutionary wiring, to the power of small habits and finding what truly brings us joy.
And how to breathe. Don't forget about the breathing.
Oh, yes, and the power of breathwork. We can't forget that.
That's right.
It's amazing how much wisdom she packs into a relatively short interview. But I think what makes her advice so impactful is that it's both practical and relatable. It's not about achieving some perfect state of bliss, but it's about navigating the ups and downs of being human.
With a little more self-awareness, right?
Exactly. A little more self-awareness and compassion.
For ourselves and for others.
Exactly. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
I think so too.
But we'll leave you with that question.
Oh, yeah?
That Dr. Smith posed.
If you didn't have to do anything, what would you do differently? Let that simmer and see where it leads you.
Such a good question.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Yeah, we'll see you next time for another exploration of fascinating ideas.
See you then.